Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Late Night Learning. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Palomba. Now, today we're going to be going through case studies. This is by far and away the most flexible kind of research method really available to any of us. A case study is usually interested in one particular phenomenon. This is something that we usually don't see, or is a unique occurrence, or is something that is kind of capturing lightning in a bottle, so to speak. So what it could be is, as of late, as of this airing, Disney has purchased great proportions of the Fox company, 20th Century Fox. And so you could do a case study on that because we really haven't seen a lot of that elsewhere. It is unique because there aren't a million Disneys and there aren't a million Fox studios either. And so it's a really unique opportunity to kind of study how these companies have kind of split up or merged or whatever it may be and get a better sense of how Disney has grown, how Fox has shrunk, and what the implications may be moving forward for media industry and media industry conglomerates for that matter. And so case studies are really unique because they offer us an opportunity for learning and for lessons gained from kind of analyzing the progression of something unique for that matter. So let's get started. So if we think about case studies, as I said earlier, it is this investigation of a singular phenomenon in depth. We often do apply multiple methods here. So some of you may wind up employing a survey along with financial statements, right? You may be looking up financial statements from Disney, right? From shareholders meetings. You may be looking up other documents from the company, and because it's publicly traded, you might be surprised what you can find publicly about the company. So it depends what you're looking for, but with a case study, you can really apply a whole host of different methods here. There is no generalizability here. This is important to understand. Because there is no randomization here, there's really no random collection of data, and again, there are no other companies that work or operate based on what you're looking at. It's not necessarily generalizable. If you're going to be looking at how McDonald's does their fast food, or if how Burger King does their fast food, there is no generalizability because really you're only looking at one restaurant. It's different here because again, you are relying upon the case study results for lessons. The goal is to better understand occurrences and phenomenon. And so the objective here is to ensure that you understand why the phenomenon occurred, kind of looking at its antecedents, right? What led up to the phenomenon, and then what can we learn based on that insofar as how we conduct business moving forward. So a case study uses multiple methods and data sources to investigate a single company or happening here. Now, unlike most methods, the boundaries between the object of study and its analysis are blurry because, again, as you're looking at the company, you're also kind of analyzing. And this does have some similarities toward what we explained earlier surrounding ethnographies, right? This idea of kind of analyzing as we're going along. That does happen quite a bit in case studies. Additionally, a case study already exists. Think about that for a second. A case study already exists in reality. So there are multitudes of case studies that are around us as we speak. Facebook could be a case study, right? All of the problems it has had with being transparent about its data collection. That really hasn't been seen elsewhere to the extent that Facebook has had to go in front of Congress or go in front of courts and discuss what it has done. The decision to select sources and methods for the case study are really based around how this researcher seeks to further understand a case study, which may or may not include research questions and hypotheses. Let's move along. So there are some advantages of a case study. For one, you do get to do a deep dive to get more information, deeper sense of what is going on in the particular topic. So yes, your insights do become a little bit more informed here, which is really, really nice. You're able to do a deep dive to really get a sense of what's going on, and chances are you've probably done more research than most, even some journalists, depending upon the documents that you look at. You may also consider if this phenomenon may happen elsewhere. And so you may look at Disney swallowing up big proportions of Fox and say to yourself, well, could it happen elsewhere? Could Disney also swallow up Viacom? Or could Viacom swallow up Disney? Is it possible? Is it practical to think about that? Well, after this case study, yeah, maybe Viacom might one day spin off MTV or Comedy Central, or perhaps Viacom will simply swallow up another media conglomerate itself. And finally, it helps us to deal with multiple types of evidence, including documents, historical artifacts, systematic interviews, direct observations, and surveys as well. And so it's a really nice method, again, in which we kind of get to figure out which methods we want to apply to get a better sense of what's going on here. Let's move along. Nevertheless, there are issues with the case study approach, as there are with any kind of research method. There is no scientific rigor or standard to evaluate a case study. Now, don't get that confused with the case study method itself not being robust or having some sort of rigor. There are excellent case studies that are out there that are rich, detailed, informed, and have clearly had quite a bit of critical thinking on the part of associated researchers behind them. But there is no standard necessarily to figure out, is this case study meeting any kind of scientific merit, right? You could employ a randomized survey of executives, maybe at media companies, to get a better sense of how media executives may interpret Disney kind of subsuming parts of Fox, right? You could do that as a way to gain deeper insight into, from an executive's perspective, was this a good purchase for Disney? Was this a good sale for Fox, right? You could do that against financial statements that you found. But while those are great methods, again, because case studies are kind of individual, it's very difficult to look back at other case studies to kind of make a case for, oh yeah, we've met some sort of wonderful scientific rigor here. There is no generalization for a particular industry, vertical, product, or service, and it's extremely time-consuming and may be difficult to summarize for researchers. Remember, you're collecting a lot of different bits of data here, and it can be very difficult to go through statements and to understand particular company documents and things like that. So you want to be sure that you're ready to kind of go through all of this. Let's move along. So in conducting a case study, the structure of the case study is also really, really crucial here. You want to think about having this kind of 35,000 view, as we have in this photograph. The idea here is that we're able to get a macro sense of what's going on in a company, and we can get a really great sense of the happening. Whether it's a company or a happening doesn't matter. What does matter here is your view. You want to make sure that you have a macro view as best as you can before starting the case study. You really want to get a sense of what's happened, why it happened, and what may happen in the future. This will help you in determining kind of the structure of your case study. Additionally, you may also want to think here, is this a pilot study, right? Is this a pilot study that might inform a subsequent study? Or is this actually an individual, isolated study that really won't have a follow-up? That will also let you know how deep to go and how much effort to put into the case study itself. If it's a pilot study, obviously you're testing the waters. It's probably exploratory in nature, and you may be doing it to kind of further inform future studies. Let's move along. What data to use? There is no right or wrong answer here. So really, a case study can use all types of data. The goal is to be sure that you are using data that will help you analyze your case study. There are two different ways that you can kind of look at this. For one, there's pattern matching strategy. So you can look at empirically based patterns compared to a predicted pattern. So if it is thought that advertised copyrights are under stress and weaken relationships with supervisors, then the goal is to view this relationship in data, right? So if you're analyzing an advertising firm and you're saying, the advertised copywriters are under stress and which weakens relationships with supervisors, you can go back and look at human resource surveys that are taken by advertising copywriters and their supervisors. And you can see that if what you observed is also reflected in the survey, right? Kind of seeing patterns in one instance and seeing if they manifest in other forms of data collection. Additionally, there's also explanation building. So the researcher may produce an explanation about a case by attempting to explain why it happened. Theory may be used here, and theory, as we all know, is a wonderful way to understand why something is occurring. Once data is collected, it's synthesized and compared to the original statement. Finally, you also may have longitudinal data. This is very, very common in case study research. The investigator may consider data points over time. So you may be looking at ratings over the last 20 years of the Disney Channel and other Disney Channel in the other Disney channels in the Disney portfolio, if you will. And what you may say to yourself is, well, this may explain why Disney took over portions of Fox. They wanted to kind of beef up their cable portfolio, right? So you can make those linkages as best as you can while you're observing data over time. And it really does help to do this, especially when you're trying to understand how a company, why a company does what it does. Let's move along. And so one thing I'd like to share with you here to help crystallize what's going on or what may go on in a case study is the Sony Corporation. So this was a case study in transnational media management with the Sony Corporation, because Sony started as a Japanese audio technology company, and it's since moved on into a lot of things. So the transnational corporation is a company that is at least in several countries. This is also known as TNMC. It's different from others because information and entertainment are being sold. And this is particularly the case for a lot of different media companies. And so first in this case study, the authors go through how Sony came from kind of a small Japanese technology company into a global powerhouse. Let's move along. And so in the second part, the case study evolves to talk a little bit more about this. So they decided to kind of provide a historical overview. Sony Walkman is discussed here. It allows for personalization and portability of music. And we also know that Sony PlayStation and the compact disc allowed for more information to be burned onto discs. And so there were more complex and immersive video gameplay made available to consumers. Let's move along. And so even though you really can't see this chart so well, what winds up happening with Sony is that they've since kind of branched off into a lot of different media sub-industries. So between electronics, music, film, games, and insurance even, Sony has branched out into a number of industries here. And you can see with sales and operating income, and even with net income, it has since been able to grow and grow and grow for the most part. Now, granted, the authors here only looked at sales from 97 to 2001. I recommend looking at sales through kind of a longer longitudinal window personally, but this seemed to work for the case study itself here. Let's move along. You can see here percentage of consolidated sales. You can see the point they're trying to make here. In the US, in Japan, Sony was really able to raise the amount of sales that it had. And so in other places like Europe, it didn't do so well here. And you can tell from this graph, they're trying to illustrate the successes and failures Sony has had as a transnational media company. Let's move along. You can see here as well, electronics and video games are stalwart engines behind the Sony sales quota that is met every year here. Let's move along. For this particular chart, they broke down Sony PlayStation 1 and 2, and they looked at the percentage of worldwide market share. So you can see Sony PlayStation 2 really do have the bulk here of share between both consoles versus Nintendo 64, Nintendo GameCube, Microsoft Xbox, and Sega Dreamcast here as well. So what the chart is trying to illustrate here is the strength, the robustness of the PlayStation console line. And to this day, in 2019, the PlayStation line has sold the best across Nintendo and Microsoft as well. Let's move along. And so you can see here for the group structure, and this is also very, very typical in a case study, is that the authors will try to kind of put out a conceptual model that really does help map out what's going on here. So you can see here electronics are kind of is the heartbeat of the Sony group. You can see that it informs the global hub. The global hub is responsible for gaming and internet, but electronics is involved in financial service, entertainment, and electronics, obviously, as well. And so electronics and the global hub as well are really the two center points of the Sony Corporation itself. Let's move along. And so we can see here for findings, Sony believes that ownership of software entertainment helps give them greater equity. Sony is able to blend consumer electronics and media entertainment, and Sony is focused on digital television, set-top boxes, wireless communication, video game consoles, and personal computers. And so this really helps us get a sense of who Sony is, what they've done in the past, and where they're going toward in the future. And we can learn a few lessons from going through the Sony case study itself. It's possible to be a media conglomerate that's transnational in nature, and that really does allow people to purchase a bevy of products no matter where you live. And there is some evidence here, obviously, that Sony, despite being a Japanese company, can certainly make connections in Europe, can certainly make connections in the United States. With media, it always becomes a little bit of kind of a cultural issue, so to speak, because many people have different perceptions of what a TV show may look like, what a video game may look like, how a film should play, what a drama is, what a comedy is. And so for Sony to be able to transcend all of those cultural barriers and to be able to make sales and have sales throughout the world really does speak volumes about what they've been able to do as a transnational media company. Well, that's all the time we have on Late Night Learning. As always, keep laughing and keep learning.